Welcome to the Federal Retirement Podcast. My name is David Rates from Benchmark Financial Group, and every month we discuss important topics regarding the retirement planning process for federal employees. This Lunch and Learn series is an interactive discussion where individuals can ask questions. To join these discussions live, you may register by joining our email list at bfgkc.com. We also provide in-person retirement planning and benefit education to federal employees. To learn more about these seminars or to schedule a seminar at your federal agency, go to our website at bfgkc.com and click on seminars. Additionally, if you're looking for assistance to get your retirement on the right track, set up an appointment with us today. You can schedule an appointment online by visiting our website at bfgkc.com or email me at david.rates@bfgkc.com. The contact information is also listed in the description. By setting up a complimentary consultation, we can review your financial situation and develop a plan to meet your financial goals. We hope you enjoy this topic and hope to connect with you soon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Benchmark Financial Group's webinar, Retirement Decisions. Do you stay or do you walk away? My name is Gary Rates, founder of the Benchmark Financial Group. As federal employees move closer to the end of their working years, they often find themselves at a crossroads, staying or leaving. The current landscape of government employment is undergoing changes with the administrative shifts and new policies influencing retirement options and decisions. Today, we'll be discussing many of these new programs and how the latest factors of today's government affect your personal situation and retirement. Presenting the program today is David Rates, president of Benchmark Financial Group. David?
Well, thanks for tuning into this month's call, everyone. Feel free to chime in with any questions that come to mind. Obviously, 2025 started off with a bang. It's the first time in a while folks have been weighing the pros and cons of early retirement options. So we thought it would be worthwhile to just touch on some of the topics and some of the key points that we've been talking to folks about who are weighing the pros and cons of whether or not it makes sense to jump on one of these early retirement options or to stay working. So like we said, feel free to chime in with any questions that come to mind. All righty. So just a brief refresher on the sources of gross retirement income. It's important to remember pension, TSP, and the supplement or Social Security are the three main ones. So things to keep in mind with the FERS pension. It's going to be a source of lifetime monthly income at the point that you retire. It has cost of living increases built into it, so the payment amount isn't static from the point that you started, which is an important variable to keep in the back of your mind. And this one's important too. The FERS pension payments, they're not directly tied to the stock market. They're tied to the stock market in the sense that your cost of living increases are intertwined with the stock market in the overall economy. But one thing to keep in mind is that in periods of stock market volatility, Uncle Sam keeps making those pension payments, which is a key variable to recognize in the back of your mind. It's not like TSP. TSP is directly linked to the stock market. On the one hand, you have ultimate variability and flexibility in terms of payment amounts and the timing of payments with TSP. But if you do things the wrong way, or if you're not strategic about what you're doing, there's an endpoint with you can run out of money with TSP, assuming that you distribute more money on the front end of retirement and you don't save money strategically on the back end of retirement. So important to keep in mind there. And then the first supplement and Social Security, those are pretty mechanized. It's a source of life. It's just going to be a source of monthly income at the point that you turn it on. But TSP gives you the most flexibility going forward as a retiree. Always important variable to keep in the back of your mind. So FERS pension, like we said, first pillar of your gross retirement income. Important items to keep in mind about pension: age and years of service are always an important factor. You want to be aware of the milestones that you have to hit in terms of age and years of service, in terms of getting an unreduced, or just knowing what your options are going down the road at different time frames. Surviving spouse benefits are an important piece of the pie, especially if you're looking to leave an income stream, and health insurance is directly intertwined with the surviving spouse piece on your first pension, and cost of living increases. It's important to recognize that your pension payment isn't static from the point that you turn it on. So last couple of years, COLAs have been quite a bit higher than they were in 2024, but it's been a roller coaster ride with inflation. So cost of living increases are are an important variable, which you don't see in the private sector hardly at all. So surviving spouse benefits, again, just a refresher, it's pretty much three options. You can go with the life only option, which is just a payment to you, the retiree, for your lifetime. The maximum option, or the largest surviving spouse benefit that you can get directly from the federal government, is the 50%, 50% of your gross pension. But because it's 50%, each time you get a cost of living increase, that percentage goes up. So it's the 50% would pay out a larger number, assuming you passed away at 85 versus 65, for instance. And then the third option for survivor benefits on the FERS pension piece of things would be the partial option, which would be 25% of your FERS pension. Usually people are leaving the partial. Oftentimes it's to cover the FEHB so the surviving spouse can continue with the subsidized health insurance, and 25% usually leaves enough to cover that health premium. So, but everybody's situation is a little different. So the options that are right for certain folks aren't necessarily the best options that work for other people. Refresher on those milestones, age and years of service again. So there's a difference between an unreduced, in a general sense, an unreduced FERS pension and a full unreduced FERS pension. So generally, the unreduced FERS pension, the three main milestones that you want to keep in mind: minimum retirement age with 30 years of service, 60 with 20 years of service, and 62 with at least 5 years of service. If you hit any one of those three, your calculation factor on your pension is 1% times high 3 times years of service. If you want to get to the full unreduced, that would be you retired at age 62 or later with 20 or more years of service. If you hit that milestone, then your pension calculation goes up by 1%, 1.1 times high 3 times years of service. So oftentimes it's a conversation of whether or not people want to go out at 60 with 20 and get the slightly lower pension calculation, or hang on for 2 extra years and get the 1.1 times high 3 times years of service. And that one usually depends on how close you are to burnout status with your current employment situation. Surprisingly, there's a decent number of folks that that opt for 60 and 20 as opposed to hanging on for 2 extra years. So, but again, the answer to that one depends on your unique individual situation. So thought it'd be a good idea to throw in some bullet points on the VERA offers. Obviously, VERAs came into the conversation for the first time in a while. So important variable to keep in the back of your mind with VERA options. If you do have the option to take advantage of VERA, it's age 50 with at least 20 years of service, or any age with 25 years of service. So circling back to the survivor options on that FERS pension. So the important questions people oftentimes ask themselves are, do I want to do a life only option? Is the partial going to be enough to cover the household income, assuming that my spouse is a survivor, or do I want to for the maximum surviving spouse benefit? And like we said a second ago, it's different for everybody's unique situation. If you have a married couple and both of them are federal employees, then oftentimes they opt to go with life only options because they don't need to worry about the federal health insurance, because they've got access to FEHB, oftentimes based off of their own working history. And then if you're looking to leave an option and you're trying to weigh the pros and cons between partial and maximum, usually that's a conversation of, are you trying to max out survivor income, or are you trying to leave enough money so that your surviving spouse can continue with the subsidized health insurance and have enough money to cover that premium? So digging into the weeds about the survivor options, the 50%, so they don't let you get those survivor options for free. You got to pay a portion of your pension to leave that option. So the 50%, the higher survivor benefit, that the cost for that is 10% of your gross FERS pension payment. So you pay 10% to leave half of it, or you pay 5% to leave a quarter of it for a surviving spouse. But they take it out of the back end of your pension payment. So in that sense, it's pretty easy for a lot of folks. But the important item to keep in mind about survivor options is the bullet point at the bottom that's highlighted. To leave the federal employee health benefits for a surviving spouse, you must choose either the maximum or the partial survivor benefit, which is a major deal because Uncle Sam continues to pay about 70% of the cost of that total health coverage through your life and your surviving spouse's life, assuming you check the right boxes at retirement. So FEHB, just remember in the back of your mind that health insurance, the subsidized health insurance, FEHB is directly intertwined with the survivor option on your FERS pension. Moving on to order of eligibility for survivor options on the FERS pension is pretty much former spouse with a court order and current spouse. it's pretty darn rare to have people do the insurable interest for minor children. Insurable interest is difficult, especially minor children. That's difficult because there's a reduction based off of the difference between you and the beneficiary that you're leaving it for. So net effect is people don't leave it to a minor child because it would reduce the pension by such a large margin that it doesn't make sense for pretty much anybody. So former spouse with a court order and current spouse are the two main survivor options on the FERS pension. Moving on to FERS supplement. So FERS supplement, it's a payment that mirrors Social Security. So if you hit those retirement milestones, minimum retirement age or 60 with 20, you have the years of service in to retire on an unreduced FERS retirement pension, but you're not eligible for Social Security yet. So Uncle Sam doesn't penalize you in that situation. They pay you this extra chunk of money that's kind of like a Social Security bridge payment. So MRA with 30 or 60 with 20. And the net effect is the more years of FERS service you have, the closer your supplemental payment is going to be to age 62. So the calculation for that FERS supplement hinges on your age 62 Social Security payment amount. But you got to remember that the FERS supplement is just based off of your years of FERS service, whereas Social Security takes into account your entire service history. So jobs that you had when you were a teenager are indexed for inflation and included into your Social Security payment. The supplement just takes into account FERS years of service. So it's not uncommon for folks to be in a spot where the FERS supplement's usually $1,200 to $1,500 a month, maybe close to $2,000 a month, and age 62 Social Security is oftentimes $500 to $1,000 a month more than that. So sometimes people are lining up these income streams that click on at different time intervals and pay out different amounts. And it's all a variable in knowing when those income streams turn on and doing some strategic planning for that event. So a little bit more info about the supplemental piece. It's paid by OPM. So you get a little bit of a break on the earnings test the first and the last year that you're getting the supplement, because once you get to 62, then you're eligible to turn on Social Security and they're not looking at the earnings test anymore. So for 2025 numbers, you can't just go out and make an unlimited amount of money when you're getting the supplement. They look at it like you'd be double dipping. So if you're getting the supplemental payment, there's, in terms of like salary type of income, in 2025, you can go out and make $23,400 or an extra just shy of $2,000, $1,950 monthly, and not worry about the supplemental piece getting reduced. If you go out and make more than that, then that's when you start to have a conversation of how much money are you planning to make and how long are you planning to work. There are ways around the earnings test, but that one kind of hinges on what your plans are for work post-retirement. And if you're in the FERS special group, so that'd be like law enforcement, LEOs, air traffic controllers, those folks, you don't need to worry about the earnings test being applied until you reach your minimum retirement age. So if you're in that boat where you were retiring at 50 and 20 or any age of 25 years of service and you were in that special group, you don't need to worry about them looking at your earnings until you get to your minimum retirement age. So one important caveat about the FERS supplement in terms of a VERA offer is the supplement doesn't kick on until you get to your minimum. So lately we've been having some conversations with folks. Let's say they were planning to retire at 57, for instance, but the VERA offer came down the pipeline and they're 53 or 54, and that sped up that time frame by a few years. We've had some folks that have pulled the trigger on doing the VERA retirement, but one thing to keep in the back of your mind is that the supplemental piece. So if you're retiring at 53 or 54 and you're eligible for the supplement and you're taking a VERA retirement, you're not going to start getting that the first supplemental payment until you get to your minimum retirement age. So for some folks, there's a little bit of a gap between like now and a few years down the road when the first supplement is going to kick on. But that's usually an exercise in accounting for that. And sometimes folks will have a larger chunk spinning off of TSP savings, and then plan to dial that amount back, knowing that at 57, supplemental payment's going to kick on. And then at 62, the amount that they're used to getting is going to go up by a couple $100 more because then they're eligible for Social Security. So Moving on to Social Security. If you haven't taken a look at a Social Security statement in a while, it's always a good idea to just get a refresher on what the numbers look like. It's always a conversation with folks about when they're planning to turn that benefit on. So when you're looking at the statements, the big bold number on the front of the page, that is the payment that's payable at your full retirement age. So it's kind of like three timeframes that you keep in the back of your mind about. So 62 is when you're first eligible to start it. Full retirement age is usually 65 to 67. That one depends on the year that you're born. And then 70 is kind of where you max out the payment. So it's oftentimes people are looking at, do I turn it on at 62? Do I wait until full retirement age to turn it on? Or do I wait until 70 to turn on Social Security? We tend to gravitate towards turning it on sooner as opposed to later. You've got a lot more control over like TSP, IRA money. You got to remember with Social Security, it's a monthly payment that's payable while you're alive and well. But in rare situations, you can get a lump sum out of Social Security, but generally you can't call up Social Security and get a couple $1,000 for an emergency or opportunity withdrawal. So you've got more control over TSP money. And really how you win with Social Security is you squeeze as much money out of the plan as possible. So that usually leads folks down the road of turning it on at 62. And if you wait until 70, the payment amount's higher, but you got to remember Uncle Sam's already squirreled away the pot of money that they're planning to pay you as a Social Security recipient. So if you're turning it on 70 versus 62, the reason the payment amount is higher is you've waived 8 years of monthly payments. You're getting a shorter duration of payments out of the pool of cash that Uncle Sam set aside for you. So if the caveat is to live on less monthly income or delay your retirement to get to a higher Social Security payment amount, it might be worthwhile to look at it from a different angle. So sometimes turning that Social Security payment on at 62, for instance, could speed up the time frame of retirement just by adding that extra income on a monthly basis. And then this one's just a refresher on what full retirement age hinges on the year that you were born. So if you were born 1960 or later, your full retirement age is 67. If you're born between 43 and 1954, 66 in a few months, from the mid 50s to 1960. So this one's pretty easy to figure out. All right, moving on to TSP. So TSP, it complements your FERS pension and the FERS supplemental piece of things. You decide how to use it and invest it. You decide what the payment amount is going to be. You decide the timing of payments. So you have ultimate flexibility there. One thing you got to keep in the back of your mind about TSP money go as a retiree is you want to stay on top of where the money is invested relative to what's going on in the marketplace. So you got to plan throughout the long haul of retirement, and you want to implement a plan for income, but you always have to keep in mind you got to have a bucket that's liquid for emergency opportunity withdrawals. So oftentimes when people are planning, it's an exercise in figuring out what they need for monthly income and having the rest invested and growing, but kind of earmarked for emergencies or opportunities that crop up. And usually the big four there are house, car, medical, vacation. So we try to subdivide those inside the plan so people don't, if you got to take a withdrawal for an emergency, you don't have to worry quite so much about reducing your monthly income to account for that withdrawal. And we'll touch on that here in a second. Big thing is you don't want to set it and forget it as a retiree. The market's a fluid thing. And you got to ask yourself, do I want to be a retiree pouring over TSP funds relative to market variability to figure out whether or not I'm taking out too much on the front end of retirement and saving enough for the long haul? All righty. So you spend all this time saving, inevitably the conversation comes up of how do I turn this money into income? So income potential depends on how much you and your agency contribute during your working years. So if you max out your contributions versus making the minimum, it's going to have a definite impact on the income that spins off of that savings. Maximizing contributions every year can significantly increase that income stream. So staying on top of what the maximum contribution amount is from one year to the next is important. And it's not uncommon if people have been diligent savers to have TSP savings spinning off just as much or potentially more money than the FERS pension piece. So you want to understand the risk and rewards for TSP funds as well. If you park the money in G fund for the entire duration of your career versus C fund, for instance, it's going to have a big impact on the total account balance, and total account balance determines what kind of income stream that you would have off of that pool of savings. So just a refresher on the different funds, G, F, C, S, and I. G G and F are the safer funds. G is the safest. It's U.S. Treasury securities, short term. F is a bond fund, fixed income. C is S&P 500 index. I is international, and S is small caps. So small caps would be domestic companies that aren't quite big enough to be in the S&P 500. And then the life cycle funds, now they range from L2070 all the way to L income. L income is the most conservative life cycle fund, and then they get a little more risky all the way up the ladder that you go. So 2070 is the riskiest of the life cycle fund that has the most variability. And the L income would be the life cycle fund that's designed for the least variability. L income would be a fund that's invested to generate current income for retirees. Just a little snapshot about TSP fund returns year to date. These ones don't have March in there, which will impact the returns quite a bit, but it's always important to look at what are the returns been since inception for GFCS&I, and what have they been year to date, or what are they currently? That's usually a good measuring stick to get an idea of where things look from one year to the next. So a lot of folks have money in life cycle funds, which life cycle funds are a great option, but you always got to remember the difference between the two funds and the fund options and how they're designed to work. So this is just a snapshot of L 2025 as of January of this year. The life cycles are a pie chart of GFCS&I. So 2025 currently has quite a larger proportion of money in G fund, which would be the safest of the 5 funds. How does that look compared to L 2065, for instance? Well, L 2065 is more on the riskier end of the spectrum, so it has a larger proportion of money in C fund, for instance. So that's a major difference between the two. Sometimes people get like 3 or 4 different life cycle funds in their TSP plan, and they get a lot of overlap there, and you're kind of rowing in a circle when you go down that road. TSP, moving on to TSP distribution options, the 4 main ones would be lump sum payment. When you say lump sum payment, that would be like putting the money into your checking account. You definitely don't want to do that. In most situations, you don't want to do that, because if you take a lump sum payment and put it in your checking account, they're going to take 20% off the top for federal taxes. Oftentimes people are looking for a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more fund options to choose from as a retiree. So if you have a traditional TSP, you can always roll it to a traditional IRA, or Roth TSP can be rolled to a Roth IRA. That's not a taxable event. It's a taxable event when you put it in your pocket, so to speak. Monthly payments directly from TSP, that's always an option. Sometimes in early retirement situations, that's an option that makes sense for a lot of folks. And then the fixed annuity option they give you inside of TSP, that one's a pretty bare bones, like Model T version of a fixed annuity. Moving on to withdrawals, early withdrawals with TSP, which is part of the conversation with the Vera offers that people have been getting. Important to remember that if you're distributing money directly from TSP and you're in a spot where you could retire, let's say 55, and you have 30 years of service, but you're still planning around this age 59 and a half that applies to every retirement savings account that exists. So if you're in a spot where you're going to retire at 55, you still have to be aware of, if you take withdrawals incorrectly, they're going to hit you with an early withdrawal penalty, which is an extra 10%. But one of the nice things about TSP is you can distribute a chunk of money in terms of a monthly payment directly from TSP in that spot where you're retiring at 55 or later, and you get 30 years of service. You can distribute a monthly payment directly from TSP, not worry about paying the extra 10%. So if you're in a special category like ATC Leo, you can move that age up to 50. So it's just the net effect is, if you hit certain milestones in your retirement situation, you can use payments directly from TSP and not have to worry about the early withdrawal penalty, which oftentimes people have to plan around. So, and even if you're retiring prior to 55, there's ways to access TSP money without paying the early withdrawal. It's just you gotta be particular about how you calculate a payment, but we've been having that conversation a lot with folks. So if you're in that spot and you've been wondering, feel free to reach out. Alrighty, moving on to just the comparison of net monthly income. So this would be a snapshot of a real world example. We were talking to a client who's a couple months ago who was planning to retire at 64 or 65. And when she took a look at the net monthly income comparison that we ran for her, that sped the retirement time frame up to like a month or two after we were talking to her the first time. So in this scenario, the gross income for this retiree was $8,800 a month. Total deduction or current deductions were about $6,300 and change. So on a net basis, $2,400 a month. So you got to take into account the monthly deductions that you're paying for while you're working full time relative to the ones that go away when you're a retiree. So while you're working as an active employee, taxes, health insurance, FERS retirement contributions, TSP, Medicare tax, Social Security tax, FEGLI, all those ones are weighing on your net monthly income. But how does that look when you switch to being a retiree? A lot of them go away. So it's pretty much taxes, FEHB, dental and vision. There could be a FEGLI premium depending on the options that you go with. And sometimes people have savings allotments, but it makes a lot more sense when you see it graphed out. So this is just the overall picture, but deductions went from $3,700 a month or the total deductions went from $6,300 a month to $3,700 a month. So the net effect is the gross amount of retirement income was lower than the gross while the person was working full time. But when your total deductions went from like $6,000 and change a month to just shy of $4,000 a month, the net was like essentially the same amount of money that she was bringing in while she was working full time. She was looking at seeing a monthly increase of $26 a month by retiring like now, as opposed to waiting until 64 or 65 to retire, which that was a good conversation for that person. And this is just a snapshot of a TSP diagram. Oftentimes people will take one TSP and chop it up into 2 or 3 different accounts. They're all earmarked to do different things at different times. And like I said earlier, it's oftentimes an exercise in pinpointing what you want for monthly income and figuring out what you want to be invested in growing, but you got easy access to it for fill in the blank. So how do you get the process started? At least for us, it's a few steps. The first step is always a fact-finding meeting, information gathering. We send you a list of identifying info to gather, and then we just sit down and get an idea of what your plans are. Second meeting, we put together a written version of the plan for you and make adjustments as needed. And then in subsequent meetings, we make adjustments depending on what you want to see and implement the strategy and make changes on an annual basis going forward from there. So how about any questions, Betty?
There is a question. If you retire in June and made over $23,400, is your FERS supplement reduced?
No, they don't. They're not going to ding you for the money that you made prior to retirement. For the FERS supplement, they're looking at the money that you make going forward from retirement, and they're always looking at it in arrears. So you just plan on that fact. Like the first year of retirement, you got to get a year in before they're looking at that year's income for that earnings test.
Aren't any other questions at this time? David, do you have anything else?
Thanks for tuning in again, everybody. And if you think of a question and you want to reach out, feel free to give me a call. You can always send me an email or submit it on our website. Thanks for tuning in and hope to talk to you guys soon.